Welcome back to Echo Report, bringing you the latest news from around the world. The silence between Ottawa and Washington was more than just a lack of words. It was a heavy, almost tangible pause that settled over the continent. For weeks, the usual back and forth between the two capitals had been replaced by an uneasy quiet, as if both sides were waiting for the other to make the first move. This silence weighed heavily on North American trade, casting a shadow over the busiest border in the world. Trucks idled at crossings, shipments delayed, and the flow of goods slowed to a crawl, sending ripples through supply chains on both sides. After the U.S. missed a critical trade pact deadline, anxiety and uncertainty grew on both sides of the border. Business leaders watched the news with growing concern, and markets responded with volatility, reflecting the deepening sense of unease. Businesses braced for impact, as speculation and fear filled the diplomatic vacuum. Owners wondered if they'd have to lay off workers or close their doors for good, while employees whispered about what the future might hold. Then, on August 25, 2025, a breakthrough. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump finally spoke directly. The call was long overdue, and anticipation ran high as both leaders picked up the phone. Ottawa described the call as focused and meaningful, with both leaders addressing not only the immediate trade difficulties, but also the ongoing war in Ukraine and the urgent need to reshape economic and security ties for a changing world. It was a small but pivotal moment, hinting at a possible shift from escalation to negotiation. For the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope that dialogue could replace deadlock. The White House, however, offered no comment, leaving analysts and journalists to interpret the silence. The lack of an official statement only deepened the mystery and speculation about what had really been said. Canada, under mounting pressure from its own industries and public, needed to show progress. The U.S., as the initiator of tariffs, felt less urgency, but both sides knew the stakes were high. Both leaders agreed to continue the conversation soon, a crucial outcome that signaled the door to negotiation was open, even if only a crack. The tariffs remained in place, but the call reopened a door, offering hope for a negotiated path forward. For many, it was the first sign that compromise might still be possible. The future was uncertain and challenges remained, but dialogue had resumed. In the world of diplomacy, sometimes a single phone call can change everything. The Trump administration's sweeping tariffs, 35% on most Canadian goods, 50% on steel and aluminum, sent shockwaves through the Canadian economy. For decades, Canadian businesses had relied on a stable, predictable trading relationship with the United States, but these sudden and aggressive measures upended that certainty almost overnight. Companies that had built their operations around cross-border supply chains were suddenly forced to rethink everything from sourcing to pricing. In early August, the U.S. expanded tariffs globally, raising duties on goods from over 90 countries and pushing average rates to levels unseen since the Great Depression. The world watched as international trade, once a driver of prosperity, became a source of tension and uncertainty. For many, the echoes of the 1930s were impossible to ignore, as protectionism threatened to unravel decades of economic progress. Even products protected under CUSMA weren't spared, as new interpretations bypassed previous safeguards. Legal teams scrambled to interpret the shifting rules, while exporters faced delays and confusion at the border. The sense of security that trade agreements once provided was quickly eroding. Canadian manufacturers realized no sector was safe. The rules were changing in real time. From auto parts to electronics, every industry felt the pressure to adapt or risk being left behind. Factory managers and workers alike faced tough questions about the future of their jobs and businesses. The impact was immediate: higher costs, disrupted supply chains, and widespread uncertainty. Production lines slowed or stopped altogether as companies struggled to source materials and manage rising expenses. The ripple effects were felt from warehouses to retail shelves. Businesses faced lower margins or passed costs to consumers. Small business owners agonized over whether to absorb losses or raise prices, knowing that either choice could threaten their survival. Shoppers, meanwhile, found themselves paying more for everyday goods. The predictability of North American trade vanished, replaced by volatility. Markets reacted with wild swings, and investors grew wary of what the next policy change might bring. Boardrooms across the continent were filled with anxiety and urgent strategy sessions. Finished goods containing Canadian steel like cranes and railway cars were suddenly hit with steep tariffs. Exporters who had long depended on U.S. buyers now faced daunting new barriers, forcing them to search for alternative markets or risk layoffs and closures. The new economic reality, higher prices, less stability, and a sense that trade policy could shift overnight, became the norm. News headlines warned of instability, and both businesses and consumers braced for more surprises. Both businesses and consumers now had to navigate a landscape where old certainties no longer applied. Families reworked their budgets and companies invested in legal advice just to keep up with the changes. The era of stable, predictable trade was over, replaced by a world where adaptability and resilience became the keys to survival. Tariffs quickly translated into higher prices for American families. The Yale Budget Lab projected a 2.3% rise in consumer prices, costing the average household $3,800 a year. Major retailers like Walmart and manufacturers such as Procter & Gamble warned of unavoidable price hikes. Ford absorbed over $1 billion in costs, now passing them to car buyers. Shoes could rise by 40%, clothing by 38%, making back-to-school shopping and winter coats much pricier. The automotive sector braced for an $18 billion hit, with new car prices expected to jump 48%. Everyday Americans felt the squeeze as the cost of living climbed. The dream of a new car or affordable essentials became harder to reach. Trade policy decisions in Washington were now directly impacting household budgets. The economic pain was no longer abstract, it was personal. Canada didn't just absorb the blow, it struck back with strategy. Ottawa imposed 25% retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion of U.S. goods, targeting products from politically sensitive regions. The aim pressured key American constituencies to push for de-escalation. Items like beverages, snack foods, and motorcycles were chosen to make the dispute personal for U.S. workers and consumers. Alongside tariffs, the Buy Canadian campaign urged citizens to support domestic products. Political leaders pushed for clearer labeling, making it easier to choose Canadian. This two-pronged approach, hard power tariffs and soft power patriotism, showed Canada was no passive victim. The response was calculated, not reactionary, signaling Canada's resolve. The trade war became a high-stakes chess match, with both sides maneuvering for advantage. Canada's counterpunch was both economic and symbolic. Canada's leverage over the United States goes far beyond the realm of tariffs or trade policy. It's deeply rooted in the vast natural resources that Canada possesses, resources the U.S. simply cannot replace overnight. This unique position gives Canada a powerful hand in any economic standoff. Every day, Canada supplies nearly 4 million barrels of oil to the U.S., making it America's single largest foreign energy supplier. Alongside oil, Canada also exports enormous quantities of natural gas and uranium, fueling American homes, businesses, and power plants. If this steady flow of energy were suddenly disrupted, American energy prices would soar, and industries that depend on affordable fuel would face immediate threats to their operations and profitability. Canadian uranium alone powers more than a quarter of U.S. nuclear plants, highlighting just how critical this energy interdependence is for both countries' stability and security. But energy isn't the only story. Canada also controls significant reserves of minerals like cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements, materials that are absolutely essential for advanced technology, electric vehicles, defense systems, and the growing green economy. The U.S. depends on Canada for a secure, reliable supply of these strategic materials, which are difficult to source elsewhere without major delays or higher costs. This resource leverage means Washington must carefully weigh the risks of escalating any trade dispute, knowing that vital supply chains could be at stake. A full-blown trade war could disrupt the flow of these crucial goods, leading to shortages, production halts, and serious consequences for both U.S. economic and national security interests. As a result, Canada's role as a gatekeeper to these resources gives it unique bargaining power at the negotiating table, influencing decisions on both sides of the border. Both nations have strong incentives to find common ground and resolve disputes before they spiral out of control, recognizing how much they stand to lose. In the end, this deep strategic interdependence is the silent but powerful force shaping every negotiation between Canada and the United States. The Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, is under threat, with President Trump hinting at a possible U.S. withdrawal. Such a move could be swift, bypassing Congress, and would plunge North American trade into chaos. Businesses built on cross-border supply chains face existential risk if CUSMA collapses. For now, 85% of trade remains duty-free, providing fragile stability. but expanded tariffs show the U.S. is willing to reinterpret rules, eroding that foundation. Prime Minister Carney must defend Canadian interests while preserving CUSMA. Formal talks to renew the agreement are planned, but trust is shaky. The future of North American trade hangs in the balance. Facing U.S. pressure, Canada and Mexico have forged a coordinated response. High-level talks in Mexico focused on aligning strategies and protecting integrated supply chains. Their $50 billion trade partnership strengthens their alliance. By working together, they resist U.S. divide-and-conquer tactics and amplify their bargaining power. Mexico's temporary tariff reprieve could be a wedge, but both nations recognize the underlying threat remains. Their cooperation turns individual disputes into a unified continental response. Neither wants a trade war, but neither will capitulate. The message to Washington, North America is a partnership, not a hierarchy. Canada is weighing three strategic paths. First, negotiate a tariff-capped framework restoring stability without eliminating all tariffs. Second, leverage control over energy and minerals, making U.S. access contingent on fair trade. Third, challenge U.S. tariffs legally while diversifying exports to Europe, Asia, and beyond. These strategies aren't mutually exclusive. Canada is pursuing all three. The outcome of U.S. court reviews could shift priorities. Flexibility is key as Canada prepares for multiple contingencies. The future depends on how the U.S. responds. The trade showdown is a test of political will and patience. The U.S. applies economic pressure for quick concessions. Canada counters with targeted retaliation and long-term strategy. Patience may decide the outcome. Who can endure more pain? Ordinary citizens bear the brunt. Canadian workers face job uncertainty. Americans see rising prices. Small businesses on both sides are caught in the crossfire. The stakes are high stability or lasting damage to the North American partnership. A negotiated settlement could restore trust. Escalation could leave deep scars. The next moves will shape the future for millions.